G'day guys, how are we all? It is the coach and we are talking Lumineth Realm-Lords. I am here with my tag team partner from Adepticon, but overall elf extraordinaire. Look at that, he's even gone to the lengths of putting his battle tome up, or his art picture. I hope it's not the battle tome because we might need this, because we are talking Lumineth Realm-Lords.
I'll just pick it up.
Oh, look at you, all fancy pants. But Martin was my tag team partner at Adepticon. He was playing Stormcast. There was no Lumineth at the time, but I know you are a massive elf player. And I wanted to do this show with you, Martin. One, because I know you're an absolute massive Lumineth player. But two, when we very first did this show, the Lumineth was in a really weird place. Lumineth Realm-Lords had that half release. We got the box set. The battle tome was locked in the special box. Nobody had the battle tome unless you bought the box. We only really had 3-4 units, kind of. It was a very restricted range at the time. And then we got this big release later on. And there's a lot of theory crafting, a lot of people speculating what this might look like, not a lot of practicing, a lot of proxying. And we did two really good shows, I thought. One with Hayden Walker, one with Liam. Liam, I think, was the battle cattle build. Hayden was more of the elf and techless or non-techless build. And it was a lot of theory crafting, a lot of proxying, but you know, you've had over 20 to 30 games now. So I thought it was kind of nice to revisit, to say, now that we've had an FAQ, now we've had practice, now models are on the table, what does Lumineth Realm-Lords look like, and what have you learned over your time? But Martin, absolute great painter. Actually, you were on the show as well when we did our Armies on Parade display board show. So people should know who Martin Orlando is by now.
For Adepticon at home. Yeah. Thank you for having me. So it's been fun. I think people started when Age of Sigmar really started taking off, like in 2017 to 2018. People who were aware of me, like on my small soapbox in the Northeast, talking about the game, were like, "Oh, Marty's the Stormcast guy." I was even coined "Good Painter Stormcast Man" by Haywood Twitch himself, and I was just waiting. I like to say the Stormcast was a great vacation home for my imagination, and now that we have this successor to High Elves back, I am all in. I am more in on it than I think people could have imagined, and I have big plans for 2021 regarding that army.
So what drew you to Lumineth? Maybe that might be a good starting point, given that for me, you're a bunch of fancy pants elves. I never liked the high elves back in the day. You're all too snooty for my empire. And then you guys come about with your big jerk face techless. But you're absolutely really passionate about it. I probably shouldn't call him a jerk face. I probably annoyed a lot of my followers, or maybe they've laughed. But what drew you to them? What drew you to the Lumineth, and what drew you to them without Tyrion?
So I think I only collected one army of Warhammer Fantasy. I started Warhammer Fantasy about 10 years ago. And that was before that. I had, when I was in school, like grade school, I was in 40K and Lord of the Rings. And Lord of the Rings is where I got my start. So I can't speak for every High Elf fan, but I think a lot of High Elf fans got their start with enjoying how they're depicted in the Lord of the Rings films. And there's a lot of similarities that can be found in how they're depicted in Warhammer. And that's not for everyone, as I've said on other shows. People can take one look at them and just understand right away. It's like that's not for me. So I really like the elegance, the culture. There's probably something there in terms of personality wise, where they try and save the world in the most patronizing fashion possible. And I think that's a little bit hilarious, but also quite what's the word I'm thinking of? Quintessential. There we go. To how they behave. And so I thought when the old world kind of blew up, that they were kind of walking away from elves in general. And when they created Deepkin and they really emphasized like Daughters of Cain, not only are we making them their own thing from the rest of Dark Elves, but we're making Marathi. It's like we're all about what's not the good guy elves. And I was ready to be okay with that. And so I stuck with Stormcast and stuff for a while. But then Tekla showed up in Forbidden Power. and then we got all of these cool things. So why no Tyrion? I always liked the techless sort of side a little more. I will gladly take when all of the elves are out and whole, and we have like this feeling of both the sun and the moon together. That'll be a true solar eclipse army.
I do like the elemental side. I'm hoping that between all the elements you summon Captain Power, Captain Planet, who's Captain Power? Captain Power. That sounds like some dodgy marketing for cereal. But you've got your quintessential elves, and I think for me, that's where I really like that they've taken what I like as elves. I'm a very traditionalist. I do like my Lord of the Rings. I do like my traditional fantasy. That's just something that I really enjoy. And I do like that with Lumineth, they have tapped into what was quintessential elves, or my perception of at least the high elves, while being able to really expand upon the range, being able to tap in and use, the little bit of Warhammer imagination other than just what came from Tolkien's world. So for me, I think it's a really cool range.
Yeah, and I think my local game store is a comic book shop in south of Philadelphia, and it's owned by a guy who owns a big 40K gaming club, and he's been running GTs for decades. He's been in Warhammer since probably before I was born, and he said he saw a lot of the hubbub online when it's like, well, high elves and also cows, and he said, how different can they really be if at the launch of these new elves we have spearmen, archers, and silverhelms as the main battle line options, which I thought was quite fun. And it's
silverhelms being your Dawn Riders.
Yes. This we might be lacking on certain things, which I'm sure will be filled out in time, because that's what Games Workshop likes to do. Leave you wanting more, and giving you clues on where they can go in any number of directions, and then making that left turn at precisely the right time and say, "Ha, you thought it was this, but actually it's this thing." So yeah, I'm really happy with where they are right now.
So I wanted to bring up something that, when we got talking, folks, when Martin and I were chatting about, revisiting Lumineth, he was like, well, I've made this amazing document, or he didn't call it amazing, I called it amazing. And he started documenting some of his games and his battles. And while we're not kind of going to do a battle review of, every single battle, it's been interesting to kind of see, and maybe we'll just kind of talk through about maybe like what's some of the things that you've learnt. I can see that, your local meta, I know, during COVID, we probably haven't had the opportunity to go to any grand tournaments, no Novas, no CanCons, no those types of big events. So I think we're kind of restricted to our local community and who we can play against. But I'm noticing here, a couple of quick things. You've got quite a diverse kind of range of, you've played Legions of Nagash, Beasts of Chaos, Bone Reapers, Legion of Asgore, Skaven, Zench, Feck, Khorne. You've really done the gambit mostly, and you've had a lot of success. While you haven't played, I think when we went to the meta, or like who you're playing, you are playing a lot of chaos, a lot of death, probably not as much order.
No.
But like, what's your take so far? And obviously we're going to go through some lists, guys. We're going to go through two different lists that Martin's built from two different what's your little fancy pants temples called? Great Nations.
They're all chapter tactics.
Yeah. I was going to say temples, chambers, tribes. But we've got two lists. We're going to break down this a little bit further. But like, from your experience so far, having quite a high win percentage, getting to play against a lot of armies, even playing Sons of Behemat. Nice to see you got a loss there. Like, what's your experience? What have you learned so far between the initial math hammering, theory hammering that we all did when we first got the Battle Tome?
So I think it should. I only started cataloging my games in this fashion at the direction of someone I would call a gaming coach. Separate from you, Sarah, who was the quintessential AOS coach.
Maybe that's the way I diversify the channel. Maybe I become the gaming coach, like a Dungeons and Dragons DM, but I like GM. Sorry, I hijacked. What have you learnt?
Yeah. So this was more about me trying to get more consistent with my games, because I walked away specifically from how I performed with the past 3 or 4 GTs playing Stormcast and Legions of Nagash. Confident going in and then not confident leaving the event. So it's like the next time I go to an event, regardless of what list I bring for Lumineth, I'd like to feel like I understand what outcomes to expect out of those given games. So for Lumineth, I would say as observations over like testing a few lists, decisions really start at list building for them. Like picking your great nation, as we'll talk later, really dictates what sort of choices you want to make. It's not like you build the list first and then find the Stormhost or Temple that will help you do better with those selection of models. It's kind of the opposite. You pick your great nation, and that will help you then build your list. Another thing to note is that this is definitely a control army. You will need to probably play 5 turns unless you are getting shut out early, which is unfortunate. But if you want to win, you're probably going to need to you're going to need to be at the table all 5 turns, and just making sure that every move counts all the way to the end. Especially for certain scenarios where it's like where you score more points the later in the game you are. I think a hot button issue, which is going to be talked about because we're still, as of recording, waiting for the winter FAQ. Sentinels. People are asking who may have not had as much experience if they just look at the war scroll just like on its face, because you don't really need allegiance abilities for that war scroll to be very powerful. People are saying these should be worth more points, not knowing that they don't do as much to impact the battlefield as people might think. They are a scalpel. They are not these romantic ideas of elven volley fire like we see in the movies, like in Lord of the Rings, or even in old high elves.
I was going to say, if you're in the UK as well, it seems like the UK seems to have a weird meta where they like to take 80 shooty elves from what I've seen.
I believe that was one tournament in France, because France managed to fit in some sort of event.
That's one too many. That's a lot of bowmen.
Yeah, and I would like to say I wonder how that does versus any number of lists which I might see in like on the East Coast of the United States, which would just make that sort of decision a non-starter. So hopefully there won't be a points increase to Sentinels. I think that's a bad decision. It's not my decision to make, so I'm just hoping for the best. And I would say Dawn Riders are also in that scalpel category. There's a lot of scalpels in this army. You do have a toolbox in your spells, in all of the options you can, in all of the choices you can make during your turn. It does come down to using the scalpels at your disposal to the best of your ability. Stone Guard, which is everyone considers like, is there a hammer unit in this army? There is literally a hammer unit in this army, but they don't hit all that much better than your spearmen if you use your spearmen correctly. So this is basically an army of scalpels and tanks, because they can tank well and they can do a lot of precise damage well. And just to close out my opening thoughts, I would like to quote Tony Moore from an interview he did with Facehammer. Playing with the same book forever only mitigates how you lose your bad matchups. So he has this mentality, and I think I understand where he's coming from, where if you really want to do well at an event, you should be playing more than just your one army, so you can understand how all of the armies work at like basically at the same time. But if you're doing what I'm doing, because I only really want to play this army, it may help me get more consistent down the road. But what's most important is that it's going to help me when I'm facing an uphill battle. I know what to do. Maybe not lose as badly or even win those bad matchups.
They are an interesting army. When I played a few games against them. I've got to play techless, no techless. I haven't played a battle cattle yet. I was really excited to get my Gargants in the face of the beefer of secrets, or the battle cattle, or whatever you want to call the Stone Mountain. And yeah, they are I wouldn't call them a slow movement, but they're certainly a 5-round type of army. And when I've beaten them, it's when I've been able to really do some serious damage early on and denied them the late game. And that for me, as the opposition, is what I've been trying to do. The longer I'm in this game with them, the better they get. So I need to really kind of maximize that. And probably one other thing that I probably noticed is that it's probably the army that requires the most focus on formation than any other army. You know, other armies, you can be loose, you can be scattered, you can string, you can do a whole bunch of weird little tactics to zone. But for you guys, it's very much about formation, been about certain shapes, really thinking about where your models are, almost like a traditional Warhammer Fantasy block of models. You're not restricted to that kind of rank and flank formation, but you are rewarded for being in certain formations, which can be a positive, but also can also be a hamstrung to go, well, when do I break formation, and what am I trading off for doing so? Because you do get some really cool benefits, obviously, by staying in formation.
Yeah. I will say that the formation rule. I don't know if we want to talk. Wait until we're really getting into the brass tacks of like the certain things. But
let's
I
talk
think
now. Let's transition to that now. Let's actually go into. So let's assume, because we will talk about your 2 lists. But let's imagine someone here has gotten the box for the first time. They got it for Christmas. They're picking it up and they've missed the initial hype. As Martin has alluded to as well. We haven't got the winter FAQ, so we don't know if any additional rules are coming in. We don't know if points adjustments are coming in. This is more about the theory and putting it into practice, so that if you want to run 80 archers, cool, go do 80 archers or sentinels or wardens. But if you want to run all the Dawn Riders in the world, run all the Dawn Riders. But it's like, how is a player now with over 20 to 30 games of experience looking at the rules, looking at the great nations, looking at the spells, the artifacts, the combinations, and season to taste, build it for the players pack that's coming up, because each tournament's different. Everyone has a favorite, whether it's techless or no techless. It's about the theory behind it. So we'll kind of let's talk about that.
Okay. So what page are we going to look at first?
We can talk. Let's talk general rules. Let's go. Let's segue into the general rules. So I've got the general rules here that by going Lumineth Realm-Lords, you are going to get a whole bunch of things. And maybe the first one is the Aether Quartz. So the Aether Quartz is that resource that's going to be, for anyone. I can't imagine too many people coming over from KO into Lumineth. So this might be a new resource or resource management they're not used to outside of a command point. Yeah. So with your Aether Quartz, you get each unit in each unit in Lumineth Realm-Lords army starts the battle with 1 Aether Quartz reserve. Once per phase, they can say that 1 unit will use its Aether Quartz reserve to use one of the following Aether Quartz reserve abilities. However, if you do so, subtract 1 from the unit's bravery characteristic for the rest of the battle. Yes, there is a way to mitigate that. Yes, there is a way to do things, but just know at the moment, -1 bravery should you use your Aether Quartz. So talk to me about maybe how you manage these resources. Are there some ideas that you have, maybe some of the reserves that are better than others? Like, what goes through your mind when you see this?
So it's an interesting sort of mechanic in that your army's probably not going to use too many command points, depending on how you build your sort of setup. Instead, this is probably I don't want to say one of the most important things. I think the spells and what spells you use are more important, but the quartz definitely, knowing when to use it and what to use it on is pretty critical because of the bonuses you have. Now, not all of these matter. Some of them matter more than others. So you universally have the heightened reflexes, which is 1 to save rolls. You can add 1 to hit. You can, if I recall, these are the ones that probably don't get used as
+1 or the reroll to cast.
Yes, reroll to cast. Yeah.
Or there's the cast the extra spell. That's the 4 Aether Quartz reserves. That yes. I should put. I said 4 with 3 fingers up.
That's fine. So the main takeaway is that you have the ability to give normally not so tough elves the ability to have +1 save, which will come in very handy at the expense of you can only do it once, and you can only do it once per phase. So it is a nice little failsafe if you need something to just take hits, survive that round of combat. In some cases, just survive one volley of attacks from a particular thing, and then once that's done and you've mitigated the amount of casualties you can take, you can crack back and do preferably massive damage back to whatever did your attacks against you. +1 to hit is, I think, probably the most situational out of all of these. It's hard to say because it depends.
Why is that?
So +1 to hit is fun in an army which predominantly does its hits, most of its damage through the Sun Metal weapons, which is the mortal wounds sort of power on all of the War Scrolls, and those are unmodified dice rolls. So giving yourself +1 to hit on mostly damage 1 attacks, Wardens, Sentinels, Dawn Riders. Dawn Riders only get extra attacks, extra to wound and extra rend. They always stay at damage 1. So it's very situational indeed when you want to take advantage of +1 to hit in this army. You can. I've done it before when I want to make sure, like, it might actually be as useful on Dawn Riders when you're charging into a big horde unit and you just want to maximize the amount of attacks that are landing.
And a lot of your guys are already hitting on 3s. When I'm looking at a lot of these profiles, there are a lot of consistent 3s. So for me, like when I think of +1, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember is that because these pieces of candy are 1 use only per unit, if you're blowing it on the +1 to hit, you know that you're not going to have the ability to take advantage of it at any other point if you want them to do the +1 to save or something like that with magic. And so I say Dawn Riders again. If you're charging them into a big horde unit and you want to kill as many as possible and know that no matter what they're probably going to die in the backswing, that might be a time to make sure that they get as much damage out of that unit as possible. And then into the magic ones, the +1 to cast. If you're taking between Heishi and Twinstones, Teclis and his bubble giving +1 to cast, or Zytrek, which is a universal +1 to cast for the first spell. This feels a little bit overkill. I'm not sure. Like this is a good one to take advantage of in other chapter tactics like Iliatha or Ymetrica, where you might not
I know one thing is people are wondering about is Teclis a trap? And I think there's a lot of discussion on, is Teclis worth his points?
Yeah. Spoiler alert, I am not sure, but we'll talk about that later.
You need to draw a line in the sand. You need to tell me the Martin Orlando, is Teclis currently a trap?
Oh, God. So I have a universal rule, and this rule is not my rule, but it's been baked into me by the people who taught me fantasy back in the day and still know how to, and they play AOS better than me, and they barely read the books. If you have anything in your army that is worth over 300 points, if it is 299 or less, you're probably fine. But if it is 300 or more, you better have an absolutely damn good reason why it's in your army. And there are a few reasons, I think, out there to ever justify something like that, at least as far as I understand it. So by that definition, I would say Teclis is probably a trap. Okay. But I really it's tough with support pieces like him, because he's not going to be in combat. He's not going to make his points back by killing anything he's in combat with, which is how a majority of the damage is done in this game. But on the other hand, and I think this is just speaking to how Lumineth behave overall, the Tech NATO, the thing that everyone's like going about, like, oh, it's this big thing. Tech NATO, I don't think does as much damage. It does a lot of damage. It doesn't do enough to help maintain board control for the army, because he's already so many points in not bodies. So if I have to get off the fence and pick a side, it's probably that he's a trap. Yeah. Even though,
it's with Teclis, I think the challenge is that people are choosing him and they don't quite know why they're choosing him. Obviously, one, it's an amazing model. but what does it bring into the army, and can other parts of your army do it better, and or do you need it? And I think when we get into your list, we'll kind of go through some of your thinking right now. It's not to say that Techless is a bad model, don't take Techless, but I think when you start investing, I would say maybe 300 is probably maybe a bit too small, but I think certainly when we start getting into the 400s, the 500 ranges, you really need to start asking the question: what does Archeon, Alariel, Morathi, these very big, even like when I look at my Gargant army and I'm spending up to 500 points for a Mega Gargant, how do I best make this army? And is it better doing lots of small units? Do I put lots of large units? I think that's a question that any army can be thinking about. And
and it's also the question of is the roster like of what supports Techless, like the limited roster of what Lumineth have at this time, bringing him down, and is Techless only going to get better with the more tools that become available to the army? Where it's like, because I think a good example to think about right now is Nagash, and that Nagash was made all the more potent when you had even forget Nighthaunt, but like say the 90 skeletons or something like that, where you can have the rest of the army is made all of the more terrifying and capable of doing the stuff that he's not doing. You get what I'm saying? Like
100%.
Whereas
go on.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I was just shooting you a private message about your audio. I'm not sure if I'm getting a reverb from me speaking. I get a little pickup there. But look, I don't want to harp too much on Techless. The meta, if you are playing in a meta where you have a lot of spell casting, whether it's a Nagash, whether it's Lord Croak, whether you have a Zench army, it might be something you're thinking about if you aren't playing in a magic heavy army, or you don't have a lot of magic damage potential, or controlling the magic phase is not important to you or your structure. I think for me, generally, Techless is probably too many points at the moment.
Techless tangent aside, we are rounding out Aether Quartz with Magical Insight, which is pretty useful, where you have the ability. You can attempt to cast one extra spell in that phase. It should be noted that this is not re-rolling failed casts, so you can't just say, I failed to cast that spell that needs an 8. I'm going to use this Aether Quartz to try and cast it again. You can't do that. I think this does have its uses. I was originally using Chronomatic Cogs, as we'll talk about in the earlier list, where I was using Cogs to try and get people to cast additional spells. Whereas I think this is this takes its place nicely, so you don't have to spend those 60 points just to slow down time. The jury's still being out on if Chronomatic Cogs is as scary as people think, with the rerolls and everything for saves and stuff. But yeah, I think Aether Quartz is definitely something to keep in mind, and it definitely follows that theme of long-term thinking. You're always engaging in long-term thinking with this army. Do I want to use my Aether Quartz now versus later? Do I want to use the Aether Quartz with this unit versus the next one? And getting to mitigating the downside, where it's like, well, if I subtract bravery for the rest of the game, there is a war scroll. The weirdest thing here is there is a war scroll rule for the Sonari Cathalar. It should be on her war scroll. It is not. It is part of the allegiance abilities. It's here. Yeah. But anyway.
So with the other rules, you've got, Absorb Despair, you've got Lightning Reflexes, Shining Company, Adjuring as Rock, and Teutonic Force. When you look at all these different additional rules that you're kind of going to get from being Lumineth, or even the Great Nation, are they all important to you right now? Obviously, some are going to be more important if you go down a battle cattle route. Some are going to be more important if you're going down more of the elf kind of build. But like, when you look at the other rules, are they all important to you when you're list building, or how do you look at each of them, or like what stands out?
Yeah. I would say the most important rules to look at and remember. So especially if you're a beginner, remember that you get to choose 2 units to fight. That's the I forget what the rule is named, but there's a universal rule that when you pick a unit to fight with Lumineth, you get to activate 2 units instead of 1, which is that will, if you remember to do that properly and you organize what charges what, that will definitely change the outcome of games. But aside from that, I think the Great Nations sort of chapter tactics. Can I just address something that's in the comments with like an FAQ question?
Sure.
Yeah. So what Mythlinthar is getting on is part of the thing that I sent to Games Workshop, the Venari sort of thing. Basically, Games Workshop. I don't want to say Games Workshop. When they were writing the rules for Lumineth, Venari kind of don't function the way that the game is intended, in that they give a keyword to a single model in a unit instead of applying the keyword to the unit.
So it's the unit champion we're talking about.
Correct. And that creates these cascading conflicts, not only within the book, but across different books, including like with Giants or like Gordrag. If you can't use models in a unit, target units. You can't target single models in a unit. So that gets just into all sorts of questions. So the thing is, can I use this 1/8 of Quartz ability? Because wizards may do it, but the answer is we don't know, because it's just there is no real concrete answer on how you can resolve that. I would just say work it out with your opponent, try and figure out what the most common sense, hassle-free way is, and just keep on playing, because that's what we want to do at the end of the day. We just want to keep playing Warhammer.
And if you're going to a tournament, you just want to make sure that you speak to the tournament organizer to find out how they're ruling that rule. Not everything is clear, guys. Not everything is easy. I know as a Gargant player, there's a lot of question with some of the ways that we interact with our battle plans and the ways we score. So I think the easiest way with any confusion is just to talk it over with your opponent, roll the dice if you have to, or if you're going to a more structured event like a store event or a tournament, just have a chat until the FAQ comes out. This army's been out now for what, 6 months?
Yeah, barely.
So it could come literally any minute now. It might not come. So don't get bogged down on something like this.
And Vinci, I will answer your question later on when we're talking about lists, because he's asking about the Bravery of Mom stuff, and it's like that's its own discussion. So anyway, the Cathalar can take the bravery modifier that your elves would normally suffer when they eat their piece of candy and hand it out to another unit, which can be extremely helpful in certain matchups and next to meaningless in others. But it is a cool option that you have, and it's important to remember the ranges, like always checking ranges, and it's like because there's a lot of wholly within versus within, and it's just sometimes the same war scroll has abilities which fall under both categories. So it's just important to keep those things here. Just keep track of those so you don't get tripped up, especially at an event where like, I'm trying to think, it's just within, but it's actually wholly within.
Is this unit an auto include, Martin? Like should every Lumineth have
Cenari Cathalar? Cenari Cathalar, at the current time, I would lean towards a yes, but I hesitate to say it's because this is all conjecture at this point because of the lack of real data. I don't want to say yes, you absolutely should. However, all the lists we're talking about tonight, all 2 or 3 of them, have a Cathalar in them. So it's probably a good idea.
Is there a world where you wouldn't take one, I think? And obviously, like, this is up for personal opinion, but what you're finding right now is this particular unit is a good unit. Is there a time where maybe you wouldn't take, is it a Calathar? No, how do you pronounce it?
Cathalar.
Cathalar. Is there a time where you wouldn't take a Cathalar? Like, for example, if I took a battle cattle list, for example, like, is it as useful?
Yeah, I would say that if you're going the Geometrica route, you probably don't have the points for it. If you're, it's definitely, I would say if you're going Geometrica, you probably don't need it. If you have Techless, the best reason you take a Cathalar is because she has the Many Be'lakor ability, which is not listed here. Even though she has all of these things which can augment bravery, her Darkness of the Soul signature spell is probably the best thing that she can do, period. So Techless makes it easier to not have one, even though you'll probably have one with Techless. And if you're playing Ymetrica based sort of lots of Stone Guard, Battle Cattle, and Archers, you probably are playing in a way that doesn't require her, because you're trying to win the game in a way that doesn't need her strategy. However, it's probably good to take one. So yeah, lightning reactions. There we go. That's the one where you pick 2 units to fight instead of 1. Excellent rule. It is not ASF. We are not continuing the ASF ASL PowerPoint presentation of Doom.
This is always fight first, always fight last is ASF
Correct.
and ASL. But just for anyone who's playing along and doesn't know the acronym.
Yeah. There is an ongoing PowerPoint presentation kept by Vince Venturella. I call it the PowerPoint of Doom because nothing good ever comes of reading that PowerPoint. And the smaller that PowerPoint gets, the happier I think we will all be. This does not contribute to that. And this is just, when you fight with 2 units instead of 1. Cool, awesome, great. Does what it needs to do.
So it means you go, I go. That's basically how it works.
Correct. You do not. And even then, because if I charge a unit, one of your units, with 2 of my units, and you take away casualties, which lock the other unit that hasn't activated yet of mine out of combat, they're just done. So the best way to utilize it is to chain combats across the battlefield together. So I know I can fight here. I'm sorry, off screen. I can fight here, and I can fight here independently, dealing with threats that don't interact with one another.
Yeah. No, it's very good.
Anything else on this page other than just... Okay.
No, that's fine. No, just thinking about all I was going to say is lightning reaction is what you're really thinking about doing here is doing as much damage as you can while minimizing the amount of damage you take. So being mindful of how many charges you make, and if that means as Martin said, interacting with 2 different units, it's almost like you don't have, I don't know, let's say 2 units of Dawn Riders charge the same unit. Because through removing models, it may reduce the impact or being able to do as much damage. So you want to start thinking about really taking advantage of charging 2 independent, maybe knowing that you can't take damage until you do damage, and even either attacking on the side or pinning and trying to get in some of those juicier targets. So we'll talk more about your list very soon. But I think for me,
or just a big monster, the ability to have both tech a big monster is always good.
Yeah, and really be able to bracket that monster down to quite significant if you can do some good damage to them, especially if you've got archers, you got your sentinels kind of doing mortal wounds as well. So
yeah. All right, cool. That's it for the main ones. There was the other page with Shining Company.
Yeah,
I can just touch on that quickly.
Cool. Yeah, we don't have to go through every single rule. I think just.
Oh yeah. Oh well, because we're not really talking about like the Alarth stuff. I just want to talk about Shining Company because it's a main way of how like Lumineth function, especially since we're talking mostly about the core troops, like the Venari stuff. I say it only sucks because of the length of the Warden pikes on the miniatures, which is why I think it's totally reasonable when I see people on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram saying they're changing out the pikes or they're shortening them or they're like making them like this instead. It's totally understandable. I have that problem. I'm leaving the pikes as is. It is annoying, but I believe it nudges you in a particular direction, merging flavor with rules. Like you said, we wanted I think the designers wanted to impart more than any of their previous releases the flavor of that phalanx rank and flank Warhammer Fantasy style play. I don't think we're going to see this this sort of rule seep into other factions. I think this is uniquely a Lumineth thing because it speaks to how they fight within the narrative of the Warhammer world, and it also impacts your deployment because we talked about the importance of because you don't have a lot of bodies, and this rule is once you give it up, like once you decide to break formation and say, I'm flicking the switch, I'm getting to go into combat, or I need to run, like in a direction, you cannot regain it. There's all sorts of things we can talk about, garrisoning or the Soulscream Bridge or any sort of future teleport. I don't know.
Let me just pause for a second, just for anyone who doesn't know what the Shining Company does. So the Shining Company guys, if you haven't had a chance to play with them just yet, or you're picking up this army for the first time, any of your Venari units, that's your Sentinels, your Wardens, and your Dawn Riders, they have an option, I guess, is to basically form what's called a Shining Company. And the way that you you form a Shining Company is that a model must touch two other models. So that's how the formation is kind of set up. Now, what Martin's saying here is when you break, let's say you pile in, you run, you string your models away so that they're not touching two other models. You've broken the Shining Company rule. Now, when you are in Shining Company, they're -1 to hit them, right. But the trade-off is they can only pile in 1 inch. So you don't get the full 3-inch pile in. So when you are, I guess there's the pros and cons. Do I break formation to get maximum pile in? Do I stay in formation and just slowly advance up the board? I think there's, don't get too locked into the Shining Company. Make the best decision at the time is probably my advice here. The best decision here is getting off breaking Shining Company because you can pile in more bodies on an objective and claim it, then that would be the smarter decision to me, as opposed to staying in company and not being able to claim an objective.
Generally, you break Shining Company with Wardens. Like I've never really had to break Shining Company with Archers. They either keep firing for 5 turns, or they get charged and die. With Dawn Riders and Wardens, you generally break Shining Company the turn you want to charge something, and that's the turn where it's like, this shit's getting real. It's time to take action. I am breaking Shining Company. Let's do this. So it's that do or die sort of thing, and I really appreciate the rule. It is only annoying because of the pikes get in the way. And there's tassels on the pikes, and they hook, and it's. But yeah, I do think it's a well written rule. Yeah.
The only other thing I would say is, so be very mindful of your models, and movement trays might be beneficial to you if that makes life easier, especially if you find yourself being slowed down and not getting to your full 5 and trying to worry about it. That might be something to think about. I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten. And as Martin said, once you have broken the Shining Company, there is no way to get them back into a formation. Even if you were to reposition them so they're touching 2 models, you've lost the rules. So if you've watched 300, the movie, and you think about the slow advancing Spartans with their shield walls, that's really what you're replicating here. So.
There are ways to regain it, but you have to shoehorn them into your list, or you have to be playing on a table with scenery that has garrison rules. That is a little bit of a tall order there, I think. So it's best to just treat it as a one and done.
So let's talk lists. We've talked a lot of theory, and I think between my discussion with you, Liam, and Hayden, I think any aspiring Lumineth player has a really good base of knowledge when it comes to Lumineth Realm-Lords. Again, FAQs and points may change this, but this is the current world we live in. The first list we're going to look at is it Xantric? Insert name here.
Yeah, you can call it the Hogwarts one, because this is definitely the magic one. If you ask your opponent without trying to pronounce anything, quick question. So an opponent with a pretty rare ability to kill specific models can break Shining Company. Yes, they can. It is possible to do it.
Sure. Yeah, Star Drakes, Gargants, for example, could do that. So that's a little tactic. It's hard to do. Certain armies can do it, but yes, someone could force you to. So I guess when you're removing models as well, probably be very conscious of where you're removing models, because you may inadvertently break your own Shining Company through battle shock or through just removing of casualties.
So anyway, sidetrack.
Sure, sidetrack. So what are you going to get? What are you going to get? This is the Magic Great Nation. You're going to get a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
You're going to get +1 to the first cast, dispelling an unbind roll for each friendly Xantric wizard in each hero phase. In addition, each Xantric wizard knows one additional spell.
Wizard hero.
You get a wizard hero. Yes, so not the little wizard in the unit. So it's only your wizard heroes. You're going to get fast learner. So this general is a command trait that can attempt to unbind one extra spell in the enemy hero phase. In addition, the second time this general attempts to unbind a spell, they can re-roll the unbinding roll. That's pretty sweet. Although if we take Techless, not getting that. You've got the gift of somebody that is Fancy Pants Elf. How do I say that one?
Selenar. That's the Moon Sphinx.
Of course it is. Don't make it easy. Roll a dice each time you allocate a wound or a mortal wound to the bearer. Add 2 to the roll if Techless is a part of your army and on the battlefield. On a 6+, so we can obviously bring that down to a 4+, but if we've got Techless, on a 6+, that wound or mortal wound is negated. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, and then finally, you're going to get the law. So the law, which has overwhelming heat. So overwhelming heat has a casting value of 7, and if you successfully cast, pick one enemy unit wholly within 24 of the caster and visible. Halve their movement characteristic until your next hero phase. Then roll a dice. If the roll is equal or greater than the unit's save characteristic, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. That happened to my squigs, who have like a save of 6, and I cried. But when you look at these rules, there's a lot of cool rules here. It's obviously, the Wizard Great Nation, are they all important to your list design? Are there things that you really want to tap into more than others? Like, how do you read this?
So at first, this might, people think, so the main thing is like, okay, all of my wizards are getting +1 to cast. The entire army just gets +1 to cast. People who can't take advantage of this, Stone Guard. It took me about 10 to 15 games to figure this out, that you don't want Stone Guard in this. If you are building a Zytric army, you are building a Venari heavy army, because Venari are wizards, Stone Guard are not wizards.
So we're talking our Sentinels, we're talking our Wardens, we're talking our Dawn Riders. That's
correct.
Our Venari units.
Yes, our Venari units, the core troops of the army, basically. And you can run this one of 2 ways. You can run this, but it's generally the more units you have. So like you can run that MSU, multiple small units sort of play style, and you can have the 8 to 10 different units of 10 models, the more casts you have. I did not go that route. I tried to find a balance sort of thing where it's like I have as many bodies in the units as I can, so that it's not easy to kill the individual units, but also maximizing the amount of casts. So it's you really have an interesting choice to make there, but you know from the onset what units you really want to look at in terms of your pool of possibilities. For Fast Learner, you're already going to be at around 8 to 10 casts of magic in each turn. And that also that many unbinds. Your general being able to unbind another one is not going to come up very often. It is neat that he gets the reroll, but you can also you can only get. I just looked at this now. I'm still learning the book. You can only get a reroll cast. You cannot reroll unbinds with Aether Quartz.
No, correct.
This is a way to reroll your unbind, which is neat, but you already have to have tried to unbind another spell with him specifically or her. So it is very situational, but it is a neat trick. The item is where I guessed this when I opened the book, and it turns out I think I was correct in that. So you have a 6+ ward save, feel no pain, damage prevention roll, whatever you want to call it, but it's a 4+ if Techless isn't here. I don't know if you want Techless in a Zytric list, because one of the main abilities that Techless gives to your army is all of the Lumineth within range get +1 to cast. But you already have +1 to cast from the Lambent Mystic's main ability. So is it really worth doubling down on a benefit you already have and possibly don't need to make sure that the other character in your army goes from a 6 to a 4+? I'm not sure that's a necessary thing. So a 6+ ward is good. It means that I'm not automatically going to be dead if you start trying to snipe my characters. It's a 6+, it's better than nothing. And the last thing I will note with Overwhelming Heat is everyone in your army can cast it, all of the wizard units as well. And it is another have movement spell. You will find all of the movement debuffing or turning off the ability of your opponent's models to do actions is going to win you more games than killing stuff. So with this tool here, it has a great range, wholly within 24. Yes, it can do damage. I'm sorry, it did a little bit of damage to your squigs, regardless of how unlikely it might have been. It's only D3 mortal wounds. I think only Teclis's spell does a significant amount of damage. The rest of the spells in this entire book are buffs or debuffs, and this is a good one.
Yeah, and that's where you find, and we will get into your list, and there's a nice little combination you can do with the Umbral Spell Portal, and really tapping into that. But for me, some of these debuffs, especially the movement debuffs, just allow you to slowly advance your army forward while hindering your opponent. So you're really kind of manipulating the board and I guess slowing your opponent down so that you can get a better position, and then once you're kind of in position, really fight your way out of it. Again, you're not a fast army. I mean, other than your Dawn Riders and obviously the Battle Cattle side, I felt that they're a lot slower than I would probably remember.
Yeah, it's one of the things where it's like you can make an arm. There is a universal spell for double movement. The army overall is slow, but you have the ability to reach out basically anywhere on the table between your shooting and the ability. It's like, I'm going to make this unit have double movement. Or you can make your opponent's army as slow as you are by having movement here, turning off stuff there, and so forth. It is an army of scalpels, but Julius Caesar was killed by a bunch of scalpels too. So
there you go. Death by 1,000 cuts, or in the case of Lumineth, death by 1,000 mortal wounds coming from the sky as you block out the sun. But we have our first list. You have taken the battalion, so the
Arlen Legion.
Yeah, so I was just pulling up the rules. So that means you need to take the Cathallar. This is why I'm never playing Lumineth.
Fun fact, because you want to say catheter, and it's not.
I actually got a free box. I actually won at a tournament not long ago the actual box sets. I'm like, literally the day before the day after I picked up Daughters of Cain. So that was really awkward. But you take the Cathallar, got it. The Cathallar, and then you need to take 2 to 4 units of either the Sentinels or the Wardens.
But it has to be an equal amount of both.
Yeah. I was just looking, so it doesn't have Dawn Riders in this one. But yes, it must be equal. So you must have an equal amount of Sentinels to Wardens. And then if you do so, the Shield of Light rule that you can reroll save rolls of 1s for attacks that target a friendly unit from the battalion while they are within 3 inches of any other friendly unit from the same battalion. So you've picked this battalion to kind of wrap up your army in a nice little bow. And then what you've taken is you've got the Stone Mage as your general. This is the Zytrak list, as we've spoken about already. So you got yourself a Stone Mage who's your general, got the fast learner trait, which is coming in from the Great Nation. You've taken the Hearthstone Amulet along with the Law of the High Peaks with crippling vertigo. You've also got the additional spell, which is Voice of the Mountain. You've got your Cathallar, which is the gift of... This list is
Selenar.
This list is killing me. You then got the
damn elves and their weird,
It's killing me. The Law of Hish, which has got the total eclipse, and you've also got the protection of Hish as the second spell. You've got yourself the named character Stone King, so that's pretty sweet. I learned not long ago that the non-named character wasn't a hero. It blew my mind.
It is a generic mountain spirit.
Blew my mind. You've also got 20 wardens with the ethereal blessing. You've got 20 wardens with the protection of Hish, 20 sentinels with the ethereal blessing, 5 dawn riders with the speed of Hish, 10 sentinels with the speed of Hish, 5 dawn riders with the speed of Hish. I did mention earlier you have got the battalion, and then you've got your Geminids and the Hishian twin stones. That is one of your 3 options for Lumineth endless spells. So talk me through the list. Talk to me, and whether we go unit by unit or whether we actually just kind of break this down.
I think it's an overview approach.
Like what does this do?
So mostly it presents a pair between 1 and 3 units, anywhere between like my opponent and either an objective or the rest of my lines. And I then use a laundry list of different either magic combination, debuffing you, buffing myself, and making sure that the units I present to you, like I'm probably not going to charge you unless it's later on in the game. I'm going to present in front of you, my opponent, a handful of units and say, come and get me. I would like you to charge me because that I do most of my damage when you charge me. And I'm going to make them as buffed as possible. Whether it's through debuffs to hit, it is ethereal, the extra ward saves. This comes by one of the most helpful things that really there was a podcast by Heralds of War, I want to say back in 2017, where he had Adam Burt on. I remember it all the way back.
Look at you name dropping here. Tony Moore, Heralds of War.
Well, go Australia! Thank you, Australia, for having such excellent sage advice on Age of Sigmar list building, both from you and Heralds of War. And it's like you want to make sure that your list is always adaptable, because there's always going to be that thing when you roll up to the table and somebody's going to say either that character or that unit. Turn 1, it's dead. You don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. It could be any number of things, whether it's Skaven, whether they bring back a version of Curse of Years, it doesn't matter. There will you have to figure out how to roll with the punches and just say, if something from my army just ceases to exist, how can I stay in the fight and keep on keeping on? So you'll notice across the army, there's a lot of spell redundancy. A lot of those spells, I just keep taking the same spells over and over because I want the ability that if I can't cast it here, or if they're too far away, I still have the spell to be able to be cast, affecting something else in my army. Or if that's dead, I still have access to that tool. I want to have as many tools as possible from deployment to the end of turn 5. The other thing to remember is this is doubling down on the death by 1,000 cuts. I am not going to the only thing that can do a lot of damage right away is Avalanor. The rest of the stuff I have to think about how I'm going to do as much damage over time with the rest of those units.
Can I just pause on a point that you
Yes.
made earlier? I just don't want to go too far ahead from this one. You mentioned that you do most of your damage when you are charged. Now, are we referring specifically to the Wall of the Blades where if you're being charged, you get to add 1 to the wound roll for the pikes and improve the rend characteristic by 1? Or
Yes.
Or where is there any other rules that are giving you?
No, that's effective. That's effectively it. Avalanor also gets +1 attack on both his stomps and the hammers when he is charged. And I think one of the best rules to consider on both him and the regular Cow Lord, even though it's not a hero, if you're within 12 inches of my Stone Mage, he always counts as suffering 0 wounds on his damage table, which has been pivotal in so many of my games because Avalanor can take so much damage. He doesn't have a ward save. You have to give him one, and that's not an easy spell to cast. So he's going to take a lot of damage, but if you position everything carefully, he's always going to be swinging at that max at the top of his table. And if he's been charged by something, that's 7 attacks with all of his hammers. Now,
And then hammer hits on 3s, wounds on 3s, rend 1 for at the top of the profile, flat 5 damage. So
right, and he is someone who can take advantage of Aether Quartz for +1 to hit. So, yes,
and you've got as well, right? So you could be hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s, wounding on 3s. Although it's rend 1, it's a bit. I mean,
yeah,
if it was rend 2,
it has to be balanced somehow. It's not going to be like
if it was rend 2 or rend 3 and then 5 damage, it'd just be straight bonkers. But flat 5 damage is brutal.
Yeah, that is probably the only strength of taking the generic mountain spirits. They are rend 2 damage 5, but at a 1 less attack than Avalanor. But I do prefer Avalanor for that. Most of the stuff in here are anvils, and they only do as much damage as they can when they are charged by something else. So it is a combination of the spearmen. It is truly a combined arms army. Your sentinels shooting from behind your lines, the Dawn Riders picking their targets as best they can to do damage, generally like in one-off, and your Wardens taking the brunt of the enemy attack, combined with support from the characters and Avalanor, and all of the spell chicanery, is how you're either going to win games or lose games.
I was just looking at Avalanor's command ability, and that won't impact your Wardens, right? Because
they don't only buff the Stone Mage.
Correct. They don't have the Alarith keyword, so unfortunately, that +1 to attack characteristics for melee weapons would only work with your it won't work with your Wardens or Sentinels. So if you wanted to kind of tap into that kind of Stone King kind of build, then I think we're leaning at a completely different list. But I can see that this is a real hammer. It's going to do a whole bunch of damage. The fact that you can be fighting on your top profile within a certain buff range. The shooting attack's not bad too, actually, even though it's only 1 attack.
Gravy. It's gravy.
It's a nice little chip. It could kind of, it's not too bad, actually.
I will say that the for late game sort of things, when you're trying to figure out what you can do with what's left on the table, the Stone Mage is not terrible in combat, depending on how many models are on an objective. Because the Stone King can buff the Stone Mage, he will end up with D3 +1 attacks, because you'll give him +1 attack with the command ability. And then 3s. If you don't pile in with the Stone Mage, he goes to rend 2 for D3 damage. So if you're trying to get through just a little bit of chaff with the Stone Mage, that's not a bad tool to have for late in the game. So it does have its use, however situational it may be.
So I'm looking at some of the spells that you've picked. So you've picked the Speed of Hish, that is a casting value of 5, and that doubles the movement of a friendly unit within 18. You've got the Ethereal Blessing, which is a casting value of 6, and it gives Ethereal to a unit within 18. Have you got Total Eclipse? Total Eclipse of the Heart is an amazing 80s song, but more importantly, cast on an 8. This one terrifies me. Units until your next hero phase, your opposition needs to spend 2 command points instead of 1. It is
relatively hard to cast without the help of the Twin Stones.
I was going to say casting value of 8 really then means it's either a techless spell, or you need to try to start finding ways to buff the cast, because statistically we know that it's a 70. So a casting value of 7 is a 50% chance of success. Casting value of 9 is a 25% chance. So you're sitting there more times than not, you'll fail that unless you find a way to get it down to a minimum +1. And even then, that's a 50-50. Yeah. So,
and another note is any number of Lumineth wizards can cast the Power of Hysh spell, which is the ability to take the mortal wounds from 6s to 5s. So if someone fails it, someone else can cast it. If your characters, and there will be times when your characters don't really have anything to cast, either they're out of range or they're facing an army where it's like Total Eclipse doesn't work on Bone Reapers, or an army that doesn't make use of command points. If someone else has already cast Protection of Hysh, the Cathalor doesn't have that. Darkness of the Soul doesn't have a lot of range. So if no one's in range, she's not probably going to cast that. So she can also cast Speed of Hysh for someone. So it's important to just always make... because this army relies so much on its toolbox to get the most value out of it, it's important to remember who can use those tools.
Speaking of tools, one that you haven't chosen out of your toolbox, but the chat seems obsessed, at least want to know your kind of thoughts about, is Eltharion. Now, Eltharion is this beautiful sculpt, and I guess maybe this will kind of, we'll kind of maybe tap into this question a little bit towards the end of this list before moving to the next one. But Eltharion is one that people have been begging to put into it. It's such a beautiful model. Do you see a world where maybe Eltharion does slot into this list? Is it maybe the wrong great nation? What role would it play? Would you swap out the Stone Hut King for Eltharion if you were going to do something with that model?
Yeah, I've like when I was first looking at the book, and because we've had access to his scroll, I believe longer than anyone else, because his scroll was basically previewed in one of the Warhammer community articles. It's tough because they finally made a good like melee solo. Like he tanks well. He's like a budget Gotrek. He doesn't do nearly as much damage as Gotrek, but he serves a similar purpose. He tanks well. He's a good duelist. He can go out there like generally on his own. He doesn't need the support or the tools that the rest of the army needs. Like the army needs the spells, it needs the command abilities, it needs the Aether Quartz and all of those other things to truly shine. He doesn't. But the problem in return is he doesn't provide any utility value back into the army. So you're almost running around with this sort of separate attack wing. And in an army that's all about synergy and trying to maximize value in cooperation between units, he sometimes just doesn't offer enough return on your investment for his points. Then that's not a problem of his points. I think he costs the right amount. It's just of the roster that's out there right now, I don't see a list where he fits, especially not Zytrek, because he's not a wizard. Despite the fact that I don't understand the FAQ thing, which took the ability of him to be a wizard away from him. So I think the best way to look at him, I think, is almost, and I hate to say this, 1,000-point games. Because there's not a lot that people can throw at him in smaller points games where it can really damage him because of how his Ghost Armor works. So, yeah,
that's fair because you're not seeing a lot of him on the table, and that was a model when the range was revealed. People were just so obsessed with the model. Anyone who was a bit of a lore master remembers this particular model from the High Elf range, the Great Warrior on its Griffin, Demi-Griff.
Yes.
Griffin.
Yeah. He was known for two things. He was known for two things: being on a Griffin and never smiling. And he got retconned 3 times.
I couldn't remember it because Bretonia had hippogriffs, Empire had griffins. I couldn't remember which side of the fence you guys were on. There's an interesting question I want to bring up in the chat in a minute. But before I get to that question from Hale, I do want to just kind of understand a little bit about why have you gone blocks of 20? So why have you gone blocks of 20 as opposed to maybe blocks of 10? Why haven't you gone a block of 30? Why have you split your Dawn Riders out to be 2 blocks of 5 instead of a block of 10?
Yeah.
Talk to me about some of the logic behind why you've chosen what you've chosen. I mean, especially given that this is a wizard list, surely you'd want to get more wizards in your army by making more small units. So what was the logic here?
Yeah. So the choice to not go with multiple small units, I think it's perfectly valid. It's just it doesn't really fit I would say what I'm used to seeing in my local community, even at regional tournaments. Like I would say the biggest tournament in our area besides Nova, which I think is its own separate discussion, is something called Du Bois, which I was on a show a few weeks ago with a friend of the show, Paul Conti, talking about. It's probably like the big awesome GT in our area. You see a lot of aggressive lists, I would say, there. So it's a lot of combat oriented, a lot of destruction or chaos, something that wants to get in your face right away. And especially when you think about orcs or iron jaws, it's very easy to get through 10 models. And I don't want to give up. I don't see the value of taking more units to get more casts when there's only so many spells I really want to take advantage of. It definitely, you actually lose shots because you always have to have a unit champion in the archer units, which means you're losing a bow. So the more units of 10 archers you take, the more shots you lose, which was one of the decisions in the tech list we'll talk about later, where there's like so few of them. But for the spearmen, I did test out 30. It's just too unwieldy, and it's only in one place. You need more board control. So 20, I think, is the sweet spot for them. There are advantages. I think there are more advantages to MSU than there are taking blocks of 30 spearmen. I don't know if you get enough.
When I look at this, I think about my journey with Halo Heart when I played the Cities of Sigmar Wizard Force. And there is a tipping point where you're over committing into wizards and the payoff isn't as great as whether it's increasing the spell casting. You know, there was one point I had, I think, 11 casts in my Halo Heart list. I was doing it more for lols than competitively. But there's only so many really good spells or so many good endless spells I can put on the table. And I'm really building for redundancy. So I think you've made some really good points, especially why you'd want 20. Especially, I found moving like 30 Phoenix Guard around, for example, quite unwieldy at times, let alone then having to stick within a formation when there's terrain on the table and trying to manipulate the board to get the best position while still trying to keep in a shining company. I can imagine that would be certainly in the harder range for our 30 plus. So I think 20 is a nice little block. It allows you to have a whole bunch of board control without over committing in one area on the table. And I think that's the trade-off, right? You put too many 30s, then you're going to have a weak flank. You're going to have a weak center.
Yeah, and that's the other reason why I think it's better to have multiple units of Dawn Riders. Like, I think 10 is the right number if you can have it. Or like five is good. I think 10 is the sweet spot. I really want. I can't. One of the reasons it will be. I don't want to say the main reason I want GTs to come back. That's not the right way to say it. One of the interesting things I will be looking at when we start doing large events again are these Dawn Rider heavy lists that I see in the Theorycraft zone, especially in continental Europe and the UK, where you have not like just 25, like 15 or more, as high as 25 Dawn Riders. I don't understand it. Like I've digested the logic behind that construction. I still don't quite agree with that choice, but they're making that choice for a reason, and I'd like to see if it pays off or not. Because when you take 25 Dawn Riders, you're really doubling down on a very specific trick within a limited pool of the units you have. I don't think I would fare very, very well with that here at all, with the prevalence of destruction and Nurgle and just high wound lists, where you don't really get to take advantage of their attacks, like the extra attacks ability. So even though they're range 2 lances, 2 units of 5 lets you cover more space, more casts, more tricks, and with the ability to fight twice, fight with 2 units at once, you can potentially charge them both at the same time into different targets for maximum effect.
When I look at the Dawn Riders and I think about murder ponies in OBR, so OBR, there's been a few little, what are they called? I've literally forgotten their names. I've called them murder ponies so many times.
Tavilos Death Riders.
The Death Riders. Thank you very much. Like they're murder ponies to me. We've seen a lot of success moving away from Mortec Guard, which is your equivalent of your Wardens, into that murder pony build, and their speed, their durability, the hitting, being able to pin opponents, being able to claim objectives and challenge even back objectives early into the game. I know I've played with Tempest Eye, which is the fast city of Sigmar, and running a full army of Pistoliers and Outriders, which are very similar, probably not as strong as a Dawn Rider, but the speed, the board presence, being able to just throw your weight around the board has been very, very powerful at times. But you're right, there's been some pretty hard counters at times where a Maw Crusher, a Beast Claw Radar, certain builds can just come in and just absolutely smash you. I think in at least your case, you've got a little bit higher armor save than I do with the 4+. Your movement 14 is just off the charts. That's incredibly fast. you do have the ability, the Deathly Furrows, to get the +1 attack, or what's that? You can do something with your wound
it's
characteristic.
it's +2 attacks if you're attacking 1 wound models.
So there you go. There you go. Like, you're going to hit harder than my Tempest I did. So you can hit quite hard with that type of build. So I think there's something in it. I think there's a Dawn Rider. Obviously you get the Lancers of the Dawn are going to give you the They give you improve the Rend characteristic by 1 if you charge. The unmodified hit roll is going to give you of a 6 is going to do the mortal wounds as well. You've got a little wizard in there as well, so you obviously cast the power of Hish. I mean,
he is also the only unit champion who gets both a special weapon and his base weapon, so he keeps his lance as well, which is fun.
Yeah, look, I think when I look at this, there's a lot of variety, and I think the point that I wanted to make here before we kind of move into your other list is this is just one of many ways that you want to build this. If you want to go a multiple small unit and make more 10s, if you don't want to go as heavy into the Wardens and the Sentinels, or you don't see value in the battalion and you want to add additional points to get yourself a Techless and drop the Stoneheart King, or like. Do what you want to do, but I can see how you're really starting to take advantage of this magic heavy great nation and put it into a formation that is going to be competitive, as well as taking advantage of your rules.
Yeah. So question in the chat, going to 10 and 5 Dawn Rider, splitting the Sentinels and dropping 1. When I started my very first list, when I was building this, was 2 times 10 archers. It did not feel like enough. I feel like you need to have I think 30 is a solid. I don't want to say minimum, because some builds don't have archers in them and they rely on other tricks. But I think 20 is probably not enough. That's also, and especially since it's 2 times 10, which is you're losing those shots. Like if 1 unit of 20 has an extra 5 shots over 5 turns, so it does add up when you're talking about numbers that small,
especially early on, where and we haven't really specifically highlighted this, but the fact that the Sentinels ignore line of sight, it kills me that my rocket battery war machines now require line of sight, but a bunch of elves with bow don't need line of sight. So having additional
is that the unit champion basically carries a magic periscope and can see through walls.
Well, I need a magic periscope for my rocket batteries. But long story short, having this really large threat range, being able to chip away those small, and that's what really scares me about playing against Lumineth, is the fact that you have an ability at a very far range to be able to take down my 5 wound heroes. Often they are the support pieces, they're the things that help up my castle, whether it is a 5-cast wizard, whether it is some type of random general, or not a general, but even just a commander that might have a cool ability.
Or
being able to take that down, and you don't care about lookout sir, because your hit rolls are so good that you can take the -1 to hit, and you can still probably put away a 5 wound character from afar. So for me, and then you reduce my movement potentially to half. That really can really hurt certain forces. So I can see why you really want to take it the most out of your Sentinels, and again, having blocks of 20 just gives you those extra potential for mortal wounds.
Yeah. And I just want to, before we go all of the Cathalars in both, I just want to explain there's someone in the chat earlier asked about the bravery bomb thing. So the Cathalar has the darkness of the soul. I would have to open the book just to see the range on it, but it's specifically where you use a bravery characteristic, where if, it's not on the list. It's her signature spell. It's called Darkness of the Soul. When you cast it on a unit, or in this case a Mega Gargant,
18. It's 18.
Yeah,
Darkness
18.
of the Soul, casting value of 7, 18 inches.
Yeah, you use the unmodified bravery characteristic every time they want to move, fight. Move, charge,
shoot.
Shoot, pile in, or fight. It's not pile in as far as No,
it's move. Makes a normal move, makes a charge move, shoots or fights. And you got to roll. Yeah. So if
but that's still if say it's like a giant or something that's just not in combat, that's an opportunity to roll four times to see if it just doesn't do what it wants to. And you combine that with the spell on my general, which is Voice of the Mountain, and he does the Skyrim Roar, where he in my turn, the turn I cast it, your entire enemy army is -2 to its bravery. And in the turn after that, it echoes. So it's a -1 to bravery characteristic. And if you combine that with the Aether Quartz thing, Absorb Despair, is also bravery characteristic. So what is the bravery of a Mega Gargant?
Mega's
7, 8? Right?
No, I think it might be higher.
8.
I think about 8.
Right. So I can make it as low as a 6, relatively reliably. And so if rolling, if I have 4 opportunities to roll a 6
it's 7.
on
Don't at me, guys.
So I would. That's even better for me.
5.
Correct. So if the chances of rolling a 5 on 2 dice with 4 opportunities is relatively high. So that I will take every advantage I need in a list like this, which relies on those 1,000 cuts, and just turning a giant off just like that. I will take that. It is one of the best ways to use the Cathalar and all of the spells in conjunction. And that it should also be noted that the entire army has the Overwhelming Heat spell, which is a movement debuff. My general's signature spell, his own one, which is so he has Crippling Vertigo, which is another bravery check. It's not as good as Darkness of the Soul, but it is also roll above the bravery characteristic if you're an enemy unit or model wants to do things. If you beat the bravery thing, you can't do it. And he also has a have movement spell as his signature spell. So the amount of ways that you have to just turn off your opponent's stuff it's beautiful to me.
Last question maybe on this list from the chat, and then maybe we'll move into another list, is they wanted to know with the Stone Mage things like an Entomb. So the casting value of 7, pick an enemy unit within 18, and it's visible. Roll a dice. If the result is higher than the model's wound characteristic, it's slain. If you roll a 6 and it's not enough to kill it, it does D6 mortal wounds instead. I personally think maybe Crippling Vertigo is just a better option. I think it feels like Entomb is like going to a casino and going for Snake Eyes, going for some big roll and just popping a 5 wound hero.
You can do that with your archers. I think it's I see the point. Like we all want the ability to have character sniping stuff. It's cool to have, but Crippling Vertigo, like I'd rather just turn off a thing and just I would rather have the option to control the battlefield a little more than rolling the dice and hoping I snipe a character.
Yeah, that would, to me, like just going for a 5 or a 6, unless there is some, I can't see a reason why you'd want to pop a 1, 2, or a 3 wound characteristic. I think you're really rolling for a 4, 5, or a 6, and you probably can do much better doing going for a large arcane bolt, going for some type of other spell. That's all I want to really talk about. Is there anything else you want to end on this particular list, or we move into the second one?
Not that I can think of. It covers all the bases that I wanted to. Cool. Geminids combined with Avalinor's 12-inch bubble, which is always going to be at maximum if he's within the range of the Stone Mage, combined with Shining Company, is -3 to hit. Very few things in the game can deal with that stacking debuff sort of castle that you can create for yourself. And that's one of the main ways I present a challenge for my opponents when they are staring down my front lines.
Yeah, that's super annoying. As a Gits player, I know how annoying it can be to be doing -1 to hit. You then stack in Geminids, you're -2 to hit. Then you're doing mortal wounds on 6s. You're doing mortal wounds anyway. So you are slow to advance, which is why Martin has gone so heavy on reducing the movement. The only other thing maybe you might want to consider, folks, would be maybe bringing something in like Umbral Spell Portal, so to really extend the range. But you may find that you probably could be better served to just wait another turn before you start moving the characteristic instead of going Umbral Spell Portal, because it has gotten a lot more expensive than it used to be. So
I will say, and just two more things, because there was also a question in the chat which I didn't think, which I think it's on me for just not addressing it for how you beat this list. Spell Portal isn't necessary in this list because I would say 2/3 of the time my units are casting a spell on themselves or a spell casting it on a unit adjacent to them, because they're all going to be, with the exception of the Dawn Riders, they're all going to be relatively close together. Avalanor and the Stone Mage can be a power pair and do their own thing. Spell Portal is useful for when you want to reach out, I think, with Techless. And how do you beat this list? How have I lost my games, as it were? So early game scoring. If whoever gets to the objectives first and has the ability to sit there, making me come to you. I don't want to be in that position because my army is a little bit more reactive. So if you turn the tables on me and say, "Hey, I'm here. You have to come to me," it's not what I want to do. Moving or variable objectives. I found playing shifting objectives a lot because we would just roll for it. I have to choose a flank when I start the game. Generally, I have to set up on, like, if you divide your deployment zone into thirds, I have to pick the center and, like, generally a flank to put all of my stuff in. I can't spread out. And if the shifting objectives stays on one flank, which I am not in for multiple turns, that's basically it. And overall, it is that lack of bodies. Like, Lumineth all have this problem, but combined with I do have the reach with Dawn Riders and stuff to say I can touch whatever is on the other side of the table, but I cannot pick myself up and move myself across the table to get there. So that's how I would say you would take advantage of my weaknesses in this build.
No, I love it. I love it. So we're going to move into our second build. Martin's going to quickly grab himself a drink. I really like that. I think there's some good stuff happening in the Zydrix list. Basically, the great nation that is all about the wizards. Now we're going to talk a little bit about his second list. So I'm going to read out some of the rules. Martin has just kindly get himself a drink. So we are going to look at Saya. And what we're going to get here is you're going to get a couple of things. You've got the Gleaming Brightness that allows you to get each of those units start with 2 8th Quartz reserves instead of 1, which can be quite powerful. The second one is going to be around the command ability. So you can use this command ability when a friendly, Zaya? I'm sure Martin will correct me in a second. Unit could use the 8th Quartz reserve ability, even if a friendly, is it Zar? How do I say this, Martin? Zaya?
CR.
CR.
We set it on Warhammer Weekly as CR, like the pirate run, but I don't think it's like that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just going to make idiot noises like I do with Shimon. If you do so, pick one friendly CR unit that has an 8th Quartz reserve and wholly within 18 of a CR hero. They can use 1 8th Quartz reserve to use an 8th Quartz ability. Okay, you'll need to explain that one to me in a second. And then you get the command trait of, at the start of the combat phase, you can pick 1 enemy hero within 6 inches of the general. That enemy hero can only target this general in that phase. Okay, like a little bit of a reverse Deepkin kind of thing. In addition, you can add 1 to the hit rolls for target that enemy hero in that phase. Okay, some shenanigans going on here. And then finally, the Perfect Blade artifact. So pick one of the bearer's melee weapons, an unmodified hit roll of 3+. For the attack made by this weapon, always hits its target. Okay. An unmodified wound roll for 3+. For that weapon's always successful. An unmodified save roll of 3 or less always fails.
I tend to ignore that artifact because the only models in the entire book which can take it are the 2 wizards, and no. I can't imagine this ever really being used, but it's fun. So CR, like,
I imagine you don't want your heroes in in combat. Like I feel like a lot of your Lumineth heroes are support heroes. Very few, other than the battle cattle, is a hero that you want in combat. So,
Right.
so I can see why this is like it's a little bit of a tax. If I find myself in combat, it's useful, but I wouldn't be building a list around taking advantage of this particular artifact.
Yeah. So it's so CR, if we want to go about the same way we did the Zytrek thing, where we go back and just like try and review like what's great, what you what's not so great, and what you just ignore. So CR, the whole thing, this relies on the Aether Quartz. You take that Aether Quartz thing that we talked about from the beginning, and you double down on it, and you get bonuses for doubling down on it. So normally it's once per unit per phase. Now, and if they use it, they don't have it again. Every unit gets 2. That just opens up so many possibilities. And thanks to the FAQ, you can use the same unit can use Aether Quartz twice for that command ability
In the turn.
in the turn. So you get to that, like, just the possibilities open up. And I think the main thing that when people were first talking about what you would use the Aether Quartz on, because first of all, this is probably the one where you best put techless, is, well, how do you get to techless? And the answer that first came about was, well, KO, because, or anything that can just reach out before Lumineth get to go, before Teclis can turn on all of his abilities. This allows Teclis to add +2 to his save. Granted, it's versus that one attack for the once in the game. It has so many more possibilities than that. You can have +1 to save over here, +1 to hit on this unit over here. You can do the +1 to cast here, and all of these things. You can add +2 to hit if you're using Dawn Riders or the Ward. Like, just the possibilities of what you can do to make your units in combination with one another just so much better really are how this list shines on top of what Teclis does. So it is also important to note that this is a command ability. This is probably one of the it's first of all, it's the best command ability in the book. It's one of the only command abilities in the book, but that's fine. And so you will need to keep track of your command points for once, whereas other builds in this do not use command points at all, or they're
Your
just
last list is not that heavily reliant on command points.
no. And just a note for the last list, if my general, the Stone Mage, is within 6 inches of Avalanor for more than for at least a turn, he can do any command abilities he wants without spending a command point. So it's like, granted it's 6 inches, but he's probably going to be within 6 to 12 inches of it anyway. It's just further like, I don't care about command points.
And because you want to be able to, you want Avalanor to be fighting at the top of the profile, so they're already going to be naturally synergized in a certain radius.
Yeah. So here you care about your command points. I wouldn't be opposed to trying building in 50 points for that extra CP, but it's definitely something to think about. Goading Arrogance is its own trick. You can exploit the crap out of this. Whether it's a good or bad thing, I think is a discussion for another time, because I remember when certain conversations being had about how this can just become very unfun very quickly. You can put chaff between your the enemy hero can only Goading Arrogance. This is the trait. Sorry, it's very weird in that it doesn't say command trait. It says command trait at the bottom, versus like of the previous side for Goading Arrogance. This is your general. So it's not going to be Teclis. It's going to be the Small Wizard, and the example would be the Maw Crusher, Mega Boss and Maw Crusher. If I put bodies in between my hero and the Maw Crusher cannot fight the chaff because it can only hit the hero that's 6 inches away. It requires a lot of positioning. It's very short range, but it has its uses.
Yeah, so it means that you've got this support general. So I guess if I'm the Maw Crusher, the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, I am a Mega Gargant player. I'm probably avoiding this particular hero like the Plague because it's the general, their command trait. Not every hero has this ability. So I can see that in a position that would be unfun because as my Mega Gargant, my Maw Crusher, my Zombie Dragon, I want to get in there and wreck face. And the fact that I'm stuck there and I can't even choose to activate against the chaff, all while they're now doing damage to me, that certainly can unlock or shut down some very big combat monsters. So really interesting, but that would require you to be within 6. So I think positioning is critical here.
Yeah, and chances are, if I'm the one in control of that positioning to make this happen, versus say the like a good example would be like the Maw Crusher or the Mega Gargant, where it's like I have all of this movement and all of this power. I'm probably going to be somewhere else killing something probably a little bit more useful than putting myself in danger of being near this hero.
So even if I was like the if I'm an opponent listening to this, or I'm like, oh, how do I avoid this? Even if my Mega Gargant or my Maw Crusher charged, let's say a unit, and this hero was sitting there next to it. If I charge 7 inches, you activate this rule. I'm outside of the 6 inches because I'm 7. Then use my pile in to get closer. I could avoid it, and I think this is where positioning is going to be critical. I don't want to harp on this too much, but I can see.
And it is definitely a trick that will come up in some games when you're playing with the Great Nation.
Don't make this an I gotcha moment. I think make sure it's very clear to your opponent because there's definitely a big feel bads kind of here. Very big feel bads.
And then Wizard Sword. Fun that 30% of all of the magic items in this book are melee weapons for wizards. As I said when we were first digesting, like Lumineth were coming out, it's like, well, this is the techless half of LRL, regardless of how much that feels like half of the sun and the moon. Techless is the wizards. Wizard heroes are probably going to lead the army, which means that comes with all the caveats where it's like your general is a wizard. Your general is not going to be a combat character. But they still felt the need to put all of these combat weapons in this book, and I don't quite understand that.
That's all right. That's all right. Tyrion, all of his Tyrion's leaders will all have pluses to cast. They'll have 1 spell to cast, and they'll get pluses to cast, while your wizards have all the combat artifacts. Yes. So it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, that's important to understand. Like, I hope that this is evidence of future proofing. Whereas if this book does not get updated, but they add models which can slot into the keywords over time, and you can take more models, like what we're missing is sort of a Venari officer, your equivalent of not quite the prince, but like this is an 8th edition term, your noble BSB, which would be like your lieutenant hero on a horse with a banner, sort of something like that, where he's not quite a combat monster. He definitely provides more utility. But it's as long as there's an ability to have a character that's not a wizard in the army, and they could just add that over time, I think provides a good use for that item.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, right now, basically the point here is that it's good there as a fallback if your wizard happens to find itself into combat. It's unfavorable, but I certainly wouldn't be building around taking advantage of a wizard with an artifact of power that is based on combat. So it's nice to have, but let's hope that you don't have to use it in the first place. But this particular list, so we're looking at list number 2, there is some commonality, but there also is some big differences here. So,
and I would like to give a shout out to Tyler Emerson for helping me build this list with his commentary and the stuff he's been doing with TTS. I can't be everywhere. We all can't be everywhere at once. So it's always helpful to have other players collaborating in just trying to aggregate the data and hot takes on what works and what doesn't. And he was definitely in on Techless from the beginning. And so when we said at the top of the show, do I think Techless is a trap? And I said, leaning towards yes. However, I think if you want to, if I were to go to an event with a fresh list, I think this list would do slightly better at an event than the list we just spent talking about. Even though I have faith for that list and practice with it, I like this list just as much as mine.
Why? Why do you say that? Why do you think the Techless list would do better? Is it because of Techless?
I think so.
Because it's the composition of the Great Nation, or do you think, like, why would you make that claim?
This is the ultimate puzzle that is Techless. Techless is not worth his points, and yet Techless does so much to your army, to the table. So it's like he's not worth his points, but he's also kind of worth his points. He's not an L'Oreal. It's a really strange predicament he's in. And this list is Techless plus friends is basically what this is. You take the battalion not for the benefits it gives you, but to lower your drops.
All right, so let me read out the list first, and then we'll kind of break it down just for anyone who, again, is playing at home without the visuals. So we've got the how do I pronounce it? The Cathalar. I hate this model. Lady with no shoes on. So Lady with no shoes on is the general. She has that goading arrogance that's coming from the Great Nation, the perfect blade coming from the Great Nation, and only has total eclipse of the heart. We don't get the second spell because that was a part of a different Great Nation. So single spell here. We have Archmage Techless and his Spirit of the Hish. We do have 20 Wardens with the Lambient Light, 10 Wardens with the Lambient Light, 20 Sentinels with Ethereal Blessing, 10 Sentinels with the Ethereal Blessings. This is that 1-for-1 that we got to have for the battalion. We've also got a unit of 5 Dawn Riders. So this list compared to the other one definitely has less bodies, less wounds in it. You do have an additional endless spell. You've got the Twin Stones, you've got the Spell Portal, and you've got Geminids. So we've kept Geminids and the Twin Stone, but we've added the Umbral Spell Portal. And I know in the last list when we were talking about Umbral Spell Portal, the chat did start talking about, is it valuable? Isn't it valuable? I can see that you brought it here, and I want to know why. Why is it not in your other list? Because your other list had more points, because it's not tied up in the 660 for Techless.
So the other thing, and as I was saying, Spell Portal has very specific uses where you want to reach out with spells. My Zytrick list, it relies on the units effectively buffing themselves or buffing units adjacent to them. They don't need the range that Spell Portal provides you. Spell Portal. So one of the better spells I think in the lore of Hysh is the spell called Lambent Light, which is the one where you can I believe it's reroll 1s to hit with shooting attacks when you target something with the Lambent Light, and it's very short range. It's only 18-inch range, but then if you cast it through the Spell Portal, it's not just Techless using the Spell Portal for Tech NATO. It's all of the Warden units being able to put Lambent Light through the Spell Portal and say archers get even more value out of their shots attacking units.
Isn't Lambent Light 18 inches?
Yes, but with that's if you're trying to attack something that's on the other edge of the table, it's like, because the Sentinels have 30-inch range effectively with their bows, so there's a big disparity there in the range of the spell that the Sentinels want the benefit from, and what they're probably going to be shooting at. So you use the boosted range provided by the Spell Portal, which you're already using with Techless, to further benefit, maximize the output of the few bodies you have on the table.
Yeah, I wanted to make that point clear, because even though that your Sentinels do have a longer threat range, you're not going to be able to get the reroll missile weapons. So by getting the Umbral Spell Portal out, then extending the range for Lambent Light, it then means that whatever model or models you choose to attack with the archers, you're going to be able to reroll those missile weapons, which is pretty crazy, which is just absolutely crazy, especially when we're talking about a unit of 20 Sentinels and they're doing
it's reroll all hits.
Oh, there you go, reroll all hits, not reroll ones, because you just use a command point if it was just reroll ones.
Yeah,
it's reroll all hits. So
yeah, and that's the only real way to because archers do most of their damage fishing for mortal wounds. Most of the Venari class units in this book do their damage by fishing for mortal wounds, and Aether Quartz doesn't get you there. This spell does.
So this allows you to fish for 6s. So even as Ridge points,
if you do the speed power of Heish.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, you know, even if you were trying to fish for mortal wounds and get the 6s, if there was 2s or 3s, so 3s or 4s, and you wanted more 6s, you could always re-roll those successes in an attempt to get more 6s. And also then kind of comes quite nicely for anyone who, if you do follow, I mean, the law, the law of the rules is re-rolls before modifiers. So should there be a modifier to hit, you'd be able to kind of skip around that. That's a super powerful spell and probably justifies why you would take a spell portal just to extend that range. You could ignore Lookout Sir. You could really fish for those mortal wounds on the 6. You could obviously increase the amount of shooting you get. So
yeah. If I can just hammer home the thing. So like you say, like ignoring Lookout Sir, Lumineth really don't. The Sentinels do not really do damage outside of the mortal wounds they do through Power of Heish. They just don't. I think it's
hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s, no rend for 1 damage.
Yeah.
So without the buffs, without the re-rolls, you know, 20 attacks, statistically you pass 10 of the 20. Then if you don't change any of the wound rolls, then another 5 go through, no rend, depending on who you're targeting. You could, you might do a couple of wounds. That's outside of the mortal wounds. So you can see that by buffing the profile, getting the re-rolls, and then going for the 6s. I've played a whole bunch of opponents who have just re-rolled all their successes just to get more 6s. So
yeah. It's truly where the power in their War Scroll lies.
And the fact that they ignore line of sight at 30 inches, that is powerful, because it means I can't put a hero behind line of blocking terrain to hide the hero. Scraggroth, the Loon King, I always try to hide him because my Grot heroes usually have 4 to 6 wounds, so you could pop them pretty quickly. I can't do that. If I'm Sylvaneth and I've got a Branch Witch hiding or a Branch Wraith hiding in a Wildwood, I can't do that. You're going to pop them. That to me, with the mortal wounds, is just brutal.
Yeah. It's and then combined with what Teclis can help. So we were talking about why are we not taking Teclis in the Great Nation, where artifacts specifically get better when he's in them. Teclis has the aura where all of the wizards within range are +1 to cast, so he takes that Sidetrack core ability and gives it to the army that's not Sidetrack. And then he has the bubble, which he can turn on to give everyone the 5+ ward. We haven't really resolved to get the seeing the Spirit Stone of Selenar. I think we would just save that for another time, because that's just I think don't be that guy. Don't try and build a list trying to game the damage it can do. You know what I'm talking about, correct?
What we're talking about here. Let's break it down a little bit for people playing at home, because they may not know all the rules, and they might not. I don't want people to be put in a negative situation with their opponent as well. So, and I do want to talk a bit more about Teclis's War Scroll, because it is a very intricate.
I have it up now. Yeah.
I'll talk through it in a minute. But with seeing stone, each time this is a spell.
It is. It's the little medallions on his pants. So it's yeah.
So each time a friendly unit within range of this models the aura. So the aura is at the top of its profile 16, affected by an endless spell, or is cast by an enemy. Affected by an endless spell or a spell cast by an enemy wizard. You can roll a dice on a 4+. You ignore the effects of a spell or an endless spell on that unit. Then pick one enemy unit within 18 of that unit. That enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. The range of the aura's ability for the model shown on the table. So what are you talking about exactly? Like, let's pin down the issue.
Yeah. So the main issue is it doesn't really, because there aren't commas. There are insufficient commas, and it doesn't really designate who owns the spell or endless spell. You can argue there are certain like chromatic cogs or prismatic palisade if you really want to be a rules, like sort of that guy. I don't want to call out anybody by name, but I think we have certain individuals in mind where it's like, well, it doesn't clarify if a unit is affected by a spell, like the like when or cogs or the wall, and therefore I get to make a roll for this damage on everything in range, because everything has been affected by it. If I impact it, so it creates this mess.
So basically, we're talking about rules as written versus rules intended. So, all right. Look, long story short, I think the point of this channel is don't be a dick. So don't try to manipulate cogs into your searing stones of hammer pants. But when I look at this particular war scroll, there is a lot to unpack, and it has a movement of 12, so probably not the greatest movement in the world. 16 wounds, 4 up save, bravery of 10. Nice little shooting attack that does Ren -3. You've got the sword and the talons, which is Ren 2, Ren 3. Some all right damage, but Teclis in combat is where the last place you want him to be. Avoid that. I can't even say that. I was going to say avoid that like the plague, but I can't even say that anymore after the responses in COVID. So we'll just talk just avoid Teclis being in combat. That's just straight up.
Right. High elf wizard should not really be in combat. Otherwise, it's either turn 5 and it's like, well, I can't do anything else, so might as well.
It's a YOLO move. Like if Teclis is in combat, it is YOLO. As the Archmage, actually, I'd like your thoughts on the Archmage piece, because at the start of the hero phase, you can say if you're going to cast one spell, 2 spells, or 4 spells. And then depending on which ones you choose, it will depend. There's some auto casts. There's, +10. There's, a whole bunch of basically, if you choose 1 spell, there's one way of resolving it. If you choose 4, how do you look at that rule? Do you have a preferred 1 spell, 2 spell, 4 spell?
Yeah, it's definitely matchup dependent. Like if I'm playing against someone, like as we get into the age of presumably like I think they're called the spell doms, the spell kings, or and spell queens.
Nagashes, we're talking Nagash. We're talking about Croak. We're talking about obviously a mirror match Teclis.
Yes,
we're talking Hallowheart if that comes back.
So you're either playing against someone who is casting a lot of spells, or doesn't know what magic is and doesn't care. Like your Gargants, your Khorne, something like that. And so in that case, go with your 4 spells. But if you're running into someone who can reliably get through your magic and stuff like that, I think that's when you get down into, do I want that? Do I want to actually pick and choose the 2 spells, the 1 spell? I'm sorry, the 2 spell and it's the 1, 2, or 4, but never 3 for some reason. There's a lot of things in this song.
3 is weird, but yeah, it's 1, 2, or 4. So
it's a theme in this army. Like and even in their lore, it's everything is either 1 pairs, or there's 4 of a thing, but never 3. So I guess that follows into the rules and stuff. It is a neat trick, but it just ends up a lot of times being, okay, you're not going to cast anything. I'm just going to have these 4 spells happen.
Teclis question for you, because I think the bane of Teclis, or the worst matchup people think about is KO. Ships coming down from the sky, you could be putting up to 2,000 points of shooting into Teclis just to remove it if they want to, right? Between boats and people in boats, or balloon people hitching rides on boats, the threat to Teclis is just ridiculous. Do you have any thoughts, or do you have any hints, or if you were to be facing a KO boat army, not that KO have ever walked up the table in their life, but if you did find that situation, what are your thoughts or your responses?
So this list is built with that sort of matchup in mind, and it's not just KO. It is any army which has the ability to reach out before you.
So Change Host with Zench would be another one. Seraphon with your Sallies would be another one. I think of Cities of Sigmar with the Iron Drakes, but that requires a spell, and I would imagine your spell dom should be able to stop the Soul Scream Breach from happening.
I also never want to write off the ability of not just a Gore Fist, but like fast destruction armies in general.
Beast Raiders, Iron Jaws, Iron Suns,
Right.
Gargants, especially with the battle plan, they can be quite fast as well. I can get a turn 1 charge in a lot of battle plans.
Yes, so it's well, and specifically also those low drops. So you build this army. This army is 3 drops. You can make it a 2-drop. There is no way to make a 1-drop Lumineth army. Whether that's good or bad is up to you, the viewer at home. This is a 3-drop list. So you're lowering the amount of drops you have in your army, which increases the likelihood that you will be able to take first turn to turn on all of the powers that Teclis has at his disposal, namely his Bubble of Feel No Pain and so on. And also, because you're in CR, if you do get that Alpha Strike sort of against you with the KO, with the sniper, like a KO armory can reliably say, turn 1, I'm going to pick something on the other end of the table. Doesn't matter where it is dead.
Yeah.
And if they try and pick Teclis, you have the ability with the Aether Quartz and the command point for multiple Aether Quartz to say, against everything in this coming shooting phase, I am going to add either +1 or +2 to my armor save, which brings him to a 2+. It is better than nothing.
You could also make it material.
But no, if this would not yet.
Oh yeah,
sorry. This is just like I have only deployed my guys, and my opponent is now going before me. Once Teclis gets to go, he's generally all set, and then it becomes the plays that you get to make. This is more a defense against what someone's going to do before I get to move any of my models. Is the reason why you're taking the CR, the Aether Quartz sort of thing right there.
Similar to what you would do if you faced OBR. The quicker you can get into OBR's face and stop them from doing things like Shield Wall, especially at the height of Petrifix Elite, the better chance you had of success. So, if I was against Lumineth, I want to get first turn. I especially want to get the charge off. So I think you're on the opposite side. Is how can I mitigate those risks? And how do I protect Teclis, especially with some very long range threats?
Yeah. So there's a question in the chat about Lumineth versus Tzeentch. Jury's still out. I've only played against Tzeentch once, and it was not a typical Tzeentch list. When people talk about Tzeentch online, they are talking about specific configurations of all Tzeentch demons and all of the tricks that Change Host can do. I have not had the opportunity to play against the Tzeentch demon heavy armies. The Tzeentch list I played against was Archaon in Guild of Summoners. I don't think that would be someone's first choice. It's definitely fun and interesting. And that game ended in a draw because we did not play a game where we chose secondary objectives, as we're not in an event where secondary objectives might be chosen for us or we might be forced to. We just tied on points. And in the core scenarios, if you tie on victory points, that's it. You're supposed to pick the auxiliaries. We did not. So I would say it really depends on the builds that you're facing.
I think the one thing that you've got in your advantage, Martin, is that a lot of armies struggle to reach out and touch that Lord of Change, especially when you've got a big wall of pink horrors or blue horrors, and you're kind of chaffed up, and a lot of people have mortal wounds their spells would be their long-range threats. With you guys having those sentinels, if you could buff up those sentinels, get a whole bunch of, just go for those mortal wound 6s, you could pull down the Lord of Change or Lord of Change a lot easier, and then hopefully with your spells maybe chip those last wounds off. But I think you've got the tools, but it's certainly I think maybe the other list was a little bit better because you had more sentinels than this one, because you're not really taking it, because Teclis probably won't play until the late game.
Yeah, he does. One of the things that made High Elves and I do mean high elves like in fantasy iconic, was their ability to have access to all of the spells, including the mega damage spells, which I think Games Workshop has made pretty clear they don't want having to do in the game at all anymore. So when you remove that from what made high elves, you are left with almost pure utility pieces where your characters aren't really there to do damage. They are there to support and augment what your units can do and what enemy units can do in terms of their stats. So your main ways of doing damage in this army, if you are not being charged into your walls of spears, are reaching out with your archers from behind, preferably a big wall, so they can just ignore line of sight and say, "Ha ha, ha ha! I'm going to shoot you," picking off those characters. And using your Dawn Riders to go after critical targets, particularly Horde units. Dawn Riders would be a good answer to those horror globs, because of like even pinks. Do pinks only have one wound, right? They don't have two wounds.
Yeah, no, all they're all one.
All right,
wound.
so I'm getting the thing about Dawn Riders is because you have the ability to fish for mortal wounds in the same way that spears and archers do. You don't always need to be on the charge. And if you're fighting horrors, you're always going to get +2 attacks on every model. And if you have Power of Heish on, that's 15 attacks out of 5 guys that are fishing for those mortal wounds. And then all of the horses. So it is a reasonably efficient way of chewing through all of those horrors. It's a lot of horrors.
The problem would be is that with those types of lists right now, they're more towards flamers, and they're more towards like your salamanders in Seraphon as well. So being able to like teleport, get within 9 inches, being able to burn an 8 with their Ren 2 D3 mortal wound type damage, that could burn an 8 without being in combat. So and then the movement shenanigans and things. So obviously, you know, we talk about like every army has its strengths. Every army has a weakness. I think that's where we currently in the scissor paper rock meta, as people have called it. There's no one golden list that rules them all, but know that you've got some hard counters. KO can drop down and shoot you in seconds. You've got the movement shenanigans of Change Host, Seraphon's Coalesced. There's some things that you need to watch out for.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, so, and just to summarize that list, it wins by using the tools that Teclis has at his disposal, combined with key uses of your limited spearmen and archers to do damage exactly as you like. It has little room for error, but it does a lot of things that the Zytrek list cannot do. I enjoy the Zytrek list because it has that nice, well-rounded toolbox of everything, and I feel like the more I play it, the more I'll understand what I can do once we get back to a competitive event environment. And that's what I want. I'm not necessarily out to get to the top tables. I want to go to an event and know that I will do reasonably well, regardless of my matchups.
I think when I look at Lumineth, I don't know if it has all of the tools to be going 5-0. Obviously, it can go 5-0 if you're a good player, you practice, you've got a well-tuned.
Matchup dependent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's matchup dependent, but you are a very hard gatekeeper, much like KO is a very hard gatekeeper for anyone who wants to go to the top. When I look at Lumineth, I think there's some really cool stuff. For me, I can't wait for Tyrion's forces to come and kind of create a full rounded force. But there's some really cool stuff here. Whether you want to go all the Wardens and all the Sentinels like we're seeing in the UK, I can see why people are taking 60 to 80 Sentinels just to do an absolute block out the sun with just sheer amount of mortal wounds from range. I can see a place for Dawn Rider builds and just having a Tempest Eye or a Murder Pony version and just having all the Dawn Riders, a super fast force. I can see uses for Teclis and a Teclis force like you've done, but I can also see an argument for not having Teclis, and whether it's through the battle cattle or whether it's through something like you built in your first list. I think once we kind of get back into that competitive scene and we see what people are doing, a true meta, I think we'll start to get a better picture. I think this is a great toolbox. I think you could.
It is.
Be in the game.
There are holes, like for better or worse. There is not Avalanor does not a universal hammer unit make. There is not a sort of thing that you can just throw into an enemy unit and just say it's going to kill that unit. Lumineth don't have that. They have a toolbox with a bunch of scalpels and tanks in it. It is what it is. And over time, as they add, depending on whether or not they change the allegiance abilities, because we have all of these unknowns right now, regardless of just focusing on releases. When more Broken Realms books come about, what factions get touched, and in what ways will change the overall environment of the game. Yeah. We don't quite know what will happen this summer, like if there is a third edition, because of everything that's been going on. Even though there is a pattern, we can't say for sure that that's happening.
I was just thinking, right? Like with Broken Realms coming, we don't know who's going to get touched. But I was just imagining, I could imagine Sylvaneth being a royal pain in your backside if they're dropping down Wildwoods everywhere and just forcing you to break your Shining Company. Obviously, yes, your Sentinel's going to block line of sight, but on the caveat of manipulating the board and ruining it with terrain, you could even, if I was IDK, your IDK boats could make it a tough time for you to get out of the blocks by putting those boats in your deployment zone. So I can see that terrain, for example, could, especially
terrain. This is one of the few armies that's actually really impacted by how terrain is placed on the table. When you're choosing your table side, it really does have a big impact, because it changes where you can deploy. Because you can't deploy you're still breaking Shining Company, even if you're in vertical unit coherency. So if I'm standing on a rock here, and because they're not touching bases.
Yeah. Does that mean I'm going to bring blue tack? I have to bring blue tack in,
yeah. So you can actually, because technically in the rules, models can stand on walls, which is fun.
I think the point that I wanted to make here as we start wrapping this up and kind of bringing these final thoughts is positional play and thinking about some of the things to watch out for. And terrain is definitely going to be a factor if I think about, especially reducing the Shining Company's ability on the Wardens. Any way that I can do that is good news for me, bad news for you. Because once I start breaking that Shining Company, once I start breaking through, because it reminds me of when I played cities with my Phoenix Guard. Once you broke through the Phoenix Guard, I had a juicy center of wizards that would just collapse. My Hallowheart wizards would just collapse. You'd have a Hurricanum, you would have a bunch of little wizards in the back line, and it'd be game over. The longer those Phoenix Guard held out, the longer I was in the game with my Hallowheart. And this is probably no different, just a different type of build. So the longer you can keep those Sentinels up. I know some people, I don't know if this, I know in early days there was some math. Can Wardens cast endless spells?
Everyone can cast endless spells.
So you could, for example, have a big block of Wardens and then cast Cogs and re-roll those saves if you slow down time, and
that's part of the that's part of the conflict.
Okay.
So I worked with a few people to try and get as much data as possible, because we sent an FAQ. Again, it didn't get touched in the FAQ for Lumineth, and we're hoping that it gets touched in the FAQ for Winter. There are conflicts because the unit champion is a wizard. In a unit that is not a wizard, the keyword, when you are applying a keyword to an individual model, it is no longer clear on what happens. And so rules as written, because of how attacking works.
So the wizard in the unit would get the reroll saves, but the rest of the unit would.
No, actually, the unit does, because and this is just where it gets silly.
All right. Let's not go down this rabbit hole. I think the point is there's some clarity, guys, that's coming. There's a few things that need to be clarified. That is one of many examples that need to be clarified. So take what we've said towards the end with a grain of salt. Things may change, just like everything. Things may change at some point. But I don't think there's a lot of stuff that needs FAQing. There's just a little bit of grey that our tournament organisers or our Lords and Saviors Games Workshop need to address to help us have better experiences that are easier and more fun for all.
Yeah. And while it would be nice, it's like I would say that these things are easily resolved. Like if you are playing your basement games, your TTS games, or just like Garden Hammer, because I know down under it's perfectly nice out when it's not like heat waves and stuff. So Garden Hammer is definitely a thing. There are common sense remedies to a lot of the issues that are currently in the LRL book, and if you and your opponent agree, it's like common sense says this is what should happen, then that's what you do. This
is not Magic the Gathering. There's no $1 million prize pool for playing backyard Warhammer. So just have fun, roll some dice. Is there any other things that you want to share at this point that we haven't discussed? I think it's been very insightful to see how your thinking as an LRL player has evolved since the Battle Tome was released, since models have been on the table. And we haven't, because I remember seeing some proxies and people putting, empty bases, and that doesn't really always tell the story. It's good, but doesn't tell all the story. But is there anything else that you've learned in, your 30-odd games of experience? I know you've changed your list a few times. Yeah. Things that maybe we haven't touched just yet through your two lists?
Yeah, I would like to try. Well, first of all, getting more games in is the goal, and whether I look forward to a time where that is an easier thing to do, like getting in-person games. So always more data is needed, more practice. I enjoy playing them. I would like to try and dip into the Geometrica builds with the Stone Guard and seeing what they can do, and understanding where they win games. I can see where they take damage, because they do take damage reliably well with like the ignoring rend and stuff like that, and re-rolling saves. But I'd like to see where that win condition is for this list, that type of build. I'd also like the opportunity to play against more order armies. As we saw in the peek at my data, I have a glut of chaos, death, and destruction, but I've only played against 2 order armies, and not ones that tend to be a little bit infamous on the internet. And I'd like to see what I do, what happens in those matchups, and just learn from them. So when I go to an event, I'm not stumbling my way through my first game with Fire Slayers, my first game with IDK. Yeah, I think the only person I can count on one hand the amount of people I know with like 100 miles drive of me that own Idanet Deepkin armies, and so I'd like to try and just get that experience.
I imagine if you play against Order, because you've played so much death, you've played so much chaos, there's a lot of high bravery. So some of these bravery bombs, or being able to reduce bravery, hasn't yielded as much damage as if you were to do that on Cities of Sigmar, for example, which is very popular in the meta. Being able to force someone to use 2 command points instead of others. Armies like Gits, for example, are awesome at CP generation. And some Cities of Sigmar are very good at CP generation, but not most armies do not have the CP generation to be able to throw out Inspiring Presence easily and spend 2 CP for it. So I think you could play the Battle Shock test really well. And it might actually even lead into bringing in 2 of the Forbidden Power Endless spells that are debuffing bravery as well. Like, is it the Hologast and I think there's some bravery debuffing spells.
The Aether Quartz instead. Yeah. I was just pulling up a war scroll for the chat, because we did get some DLC this Christmas holiday in the form of Miari's Light Colors, which is a Geometrica partisan sort of wizard and his retinue. And
the Warcry warband.
Yeah, Underworlds.
Underworlds. That's
Lumineth did get rules for Warcry in their White Dwarf, the accompanying White Dwarf. I have only played Warcry exactly 4 times, so I cannot really comment on how
4
it plays.
times more than me.
Yeah. So how does they have a spell? He has a spell casting value of 6. If successfully cast until your next hero phase, subtract 1 from hit rolls that target the caster, and subtract 1 from hit rolls that attacks made by whistle weapons that target other friendly units wholly within 6 inches of the caster. I've seen some diagrams on Facebook about how you can fit a unit of 20 archers around him to make sure that they get an additional -1. The unit and him is 220 points. Solid 6.5 out of 10.
Okay. I look forward to seeing that list tech.
Yeah. As I universally tell people that it's like, don't let the War Scrolls stop you from buying the models. I see Underworlds as AOS and HD. We already get great models. Your army gets even better models. For like in a nice little box, and feel free to spread them around as proxies or alternate sculpts of versions of existing things.
I've just done that with my DOK, and 100%. And Martin, I'm going to end the show because I've got the perfect comment to bring us home, and I'm even going to bring it up on the screen here. And as Nick's saying, is what I'm saying is that Gits beat IRL every time. Yes, as a Gits player, I can 100% confirm that your greatest enemy is the mighty Gits. But Martin, you are massive on Twitter. You are accessible on Instagram. I do have your Twitter handle below. If you love looking at some amazingly painted, Martin is an awesome painter, very good with his armies on parade display boards as well. So if you want an overall hobby hero, I would highly recommend reaching out, following Martin. But is there anything you want to kind of bring us home with? Any shout outs, any thank yous, any people want to chat to you more? Where can they find you type of things?
Yeah, as you said, the Twitter and Instagram. I believe my Instagram's in the in my Twitter bio and stuff like that. I will be, one of my New Year's resolutions is to make at least one YouTube video talking about Lumineth in 2021, how I made the army, and like because I've not been quiet about it on Twitter. And today I previewed some concept art, which is going into some bigger projects related to my Lumineth. You can go find that there. So yeah, I look forward to creating something finally for the YouTube space. I'm sure it will be baby steps, but that's how everyone starts somewhere. So yeah, that's about it.
No, and I'll bring this last comment up. It says Martin Orlando is an epic painter. So that is how we're going to close out the show, because I 100% agree. Martin, thank you for spending over 2 hours with us talking through Lumineth Realm-Lords, how you're looking at the army, how you're looking at the rules. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a few things. And don't forget, there is 2 other episodes, one with Lee and Burnett Blue, one with Hayden Walker, where we talked Lumineth. So between those 3 episodes, you have a lot of great content where it talks about how competitive players are looking at their list. So Martin, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
We'll chat again soon.
Yeah. Mate, how good was that video? Surely it's going to go straight to the pool room. If you enjoyed that video, I would appreciate it if you crush that like button, and if you have an opinion, leave it in the comments section. That lets YouTube know it's a great video and it should share it with other Age of Sigmar players. Cheers to all the bloody legends here on the screen who have financially supported AOS Coach on Patreon on YouTube members. Their contributions have helped me improve the quality, frequency, and the variety of content on this channel. So cheers guys, you are bloody legends. Until the next video, don't forget to shoot the heroes and have a good one.